A poor boy rescued a baby from an overturned car, but when he took the child to the Grand Villa, he was treated as a suspect. When the wealthy owner finally understood what the boy had done, his eyes filled with tears. Ravi woke up to the sound of his alarm clock buzzing persistently. He rubbed his eyes, the dim morning light seeping through the worn curtains in their one-room home. Glancing over, he saw his siblings, Maya and Arjun, still asleep, curled under their mismatched blankets. He had to get up before them. That was their arrangement. He had to help before their mother left for work. "Ravi, are you awake?" his mother called softly from the small kitchen. Her voice was tired, carrying the weight of too many long shifts. "Yes, Ma," he replied, sitting up quickly. He moved toward the small dresser in the corner, pulling on a faded shirt and a pair of shorts. The narrow hallway leading to the kitchen was cramped, the walls close enough for him to brush with his hands. The air smelled of coffee, its aroma mingling with the faint metallic scent of the old pots hanging nearby. His mother stood by the stove, adjusting her scarf. She wore her uniform, the one she hated but couldn't replace. "Make sure they eat something before school," she said, her hand motioning to the half-empty pantry. Ravi nodded, glancing at the meager supplies. A small loaf of bread, a few eggs, and a carton of milk that was almost empty. "Don't worry, Ma," he said, forcing a smile as he kissed her cheek. "We'll manage." She touched his face briefly, her calloused fingers warm. "You're a good boy, Ravi. Don't forget that." "I won't, Ma. Love you." "Love you too." After she left, Ravi quickly set about making breakfast. He toasted slices of bread, watered down the last of the milk, and managed to fry the eggs thin enough for everyone to get a piece. Maya stumbled into the kitchen first, her dark hair tangled and her eyes half closed. "Morning," Ravi said, placing a plate in front of her. She yawned, nodding in reply. Arjun followed, dragging his blanket behind him. They ate quietly, the only sounds the crunch of toast and the scrape of utensils. Ravi kept an eye on the clock, knowing they needed to leave soon. Once the three of them were ready, he walked them to school. The streets were alive with honking vehicles and the chatter of neighbors. Their community was noisy but familiar. At the school gate, Ravi hugged Maya and Arjun tightly, watching as they disappeared into the crowd of children. He turned back toward home, his thoughts already racing. The electric bill notice was still taped to their door, a glaring reminder in bold red letters. Final notice. Ravi pulled it down and folded it carefully, tucking it into his pocket. He knew his mother would be heartbroken if they lost power again, especially with the kids at home. He needed a way to make money. Walking through the neighborhood, he asked around for odd jobs. Mr. Patel, who sometimes paid him to clean the shop windows, shook his head apologetically. "Already done yesterday, beta. Maybe next week." Ravi kept searching, but every door brought the same answer. By the time he reached the busy intersection near the main road, his hope was dwindling. He stood there, kicking a loose stone, when the screech of tires broke through the din of the street. Ravi turned sharply, his heart pounding as he saw a car lose control, skidding wildly before flipping over and landing on its roof. A deafening crash followed, then silence. People froze, their faces pale with shock, and then, faintly, came the sound of a baby crying. Without thinking, Ravi sprinted toward the overturned car. Shards of glass crunched under his sandals as he reached the vehicle. Inside, he saw a woman slumped over the steering wheel, unconscious. In the back seat, a baby strapped into a car seat wailed, its tiny face red and terrified. Ravi shouted, looking back at the bystanders. No one moved. They just stared, their expressions blank with fear. Swallowing his own terror, Ravi grabbed the door handle. It was stuck. "Come on," he muttered, yanking with all his strength. His hands burned as the metal cut into his palms, but finally, the door gave way. Crawling inside, he unfastened the baby from the seat, cradling the child in his arms. The baby's cries pierced the air as Ravi backed out of the wreckage. He looked around, hoping someone would step forward to help, but the crowd only murmured amongst themselves. His eyes landed on the Grand Villa at the end of the street. Its towering gates and sprawling gardens were a stark contrast to the crowded neighborhood. Ravi remembered seeing a woman there once, holding a baby. It had to be theirs. Clutching the baby tightly, he started running. His legs ached, but he didn't stop until he reached the gates. He banged on them with his free hand, shouting, "Hello? Please, I need help. There's been an accident. A man in a suit appeared, his face shifting from confusion to alarm as he saw Ravi with the crying child. Moments later, 2 security guards emerged, blocking Ravi's path. "Stop right there," one of them barked. Ravi froze, panting. "Please," he said desperately. "I found this baby in a car crash. I think it's yours. I just wanted to keep it safe." The guards exchanged wary glances before one of them spoke into a radio. A few tense moments later, a man stepped out of the house. He was tall and imposing, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit. His eyes narrowed as he looked at Ravi, then at the baby. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Who are you, and what are you doing with my child?" Ravi's heart sank. He tightened his grip on the baby, his voice trembling as he explained. "There was an accident. The car flipped. I heard the baby crying. I just wanted to help." The man's expression didn't soften. If anything, his suspicion deepened. He took a step closer, his voice sharp. "And I'm supposed to believe you found my child by coincidence?" Ravi's mouth went dry. He opened it to reply, but the words stuck in his throat. The baby's cries filled the silence between them, the weight of the man's glare pressing down on him. Finally, the man reached out, taking the baby from Ravi's arms. His movements were tense, but as he cradled the child, his expression shifted. The suspicion faded, replaced by something softer. Relief, maybe even gratitude. The guards stood back, their stances still rigid. One of them spoke. "Should we call the police, sir?" Ravi's stomach lurched. "No," he blurted out, panic flooding his voice. "You don't need to do that. I swear I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." The man, who Ravi now assumed must be Mr. Kapoor, raised a hand, silencing the guard. He looked at Ravi again, his gaze less harsh now. "Where are you from, boy? What's your name?" "Ravi," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I live down the street." Mr. Kapoor studied him for a long moment, then let out a sigh. "Come inside. Let's get that hand of yours cleaned up." Ravi blinked in surprise. The guard stepped aside reluctantly, and Ravi followed Mr. Kapoor through the gates. The villa was even grander up close, with marble columns and sprawling gardens. Inside, the air was cool, the floors gleaming. Ravi felt painfully aware of the dirt on his clothes and the blood on his hands. Mr. Kapoor led him to a small sitting room, where he handed Ravi a first aid kit. "Clean yourself up," he said, his tone softer now, "and tell me exactly what happened." Ravi did as he was told, recounting the events of the crash. Mr. Kapoor listened silently, his expression unreadable. When Ravi finished, the man nodded slowly. "You were brave," he said at last. "Foolish, but brave." Before Ravi could respond, the door opened, and a police officer entered. Ravi's chest tightened, but Mr. Kapoor quickly explained the situation, assuring the officer that Ravi had done nothing wrong. When the officer left, Mr. Kapoor turned back to Ravi. "You can go now," he said. "Thank you for saving my son." Ravi nodded, his legs unsteady as he stood. As he left the villa, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? So why did he feel so small, so powerless? When he got home, his mother wasn't back yet. The electric bill notice sat accusingly on the counter. Ravi stared at it, his chest tightening. He needed to find a solution, fast. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. Ravi opened it to find Mr. Kapoor standing there, holding an envelope. "I owe you a debt," Mr. Kapoor said. "This is for you, to help your family." Ravi looked at the envelope, thick with cash, and shook his head. "I didn't do it for money, sir. I can't take that." Mr. Kapoor's brows furrowed. "Then what can I do? You need help, don't you?" Ravi hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Give me a job," he said. "I'll work for you. Anything you need." Mr. Kapoor studied him for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Be here tomorrow after school. We'll find something for you." The next day marked the beginning of a new chapter for Ravi. He worked tirelessly in the villa's garden, under the guidance of Naresh, the head gardener. Though the work was hard, Ravi felt a sense of purpose. For the first time, he was earning money to help his family. As the days turned into weeks, Mr. Kapoor began to see Ravi in a new light. The boy's determination and integrity were undeniable. One afternoon, he introduced Ravi to Mr. Sharma, who ran a program for underprivileged youth. "I think Ravi would be an excellent candidate," Mr. Kapoor said. Ravi hesitated, overwhelmed by the opportunity. "You really think I can do it?" he asked. "I know you can," Mr. Kapoor replied. From that day on, Ravi's life began to change. He balanced his studies, his work at the villa, and the new after-school program. His siblings marveled at his books, gifts from Mr. Kapoor, and his mother's eyes filled with pride whenever she looked at him. Ravi knew there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time he felt hope, not just for himself, but for his family. And that hope was enough to keep him moving forward.